Experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted. Stanford. Life does not teach us through easy victories, but through the silent scars left behind every time we reach for a dream and fall short. Because when we achieve what we desire, we often only feel a fleeting sense of happiness. Success is like a spotlight, brilliant but short-lived. It brings us joy, but rarely does it make us look deep within ourselves. Only failure forces a person to confront their inner self. Only when a door slams in our face do we begin to ask, where did I go wrong? What am I lacking? Or perhaps, were some things simply never meant for me? Those questions are painful, yet they are precisely what give depth to a soul. Experience is essentially the mark of our collisions with reality. It is like the calluses formed on a laborer's hands, not beautiful, but proof of growth. A person who has never failed often carries a fragile confidence, for they do not yet understand how coldly life can change. But those who have experienced loss, rejection, and the feeling of helplessness possess a different perspective on life. They are calmer in the face of storms, for they know that everything can break. They know how to cherish small joys, having tasted the bitterness of lack and despair. When we are young, we often view failure as the end of the road. But as we mature, we understand that failure is merely a form of life's tuition. There are lessons that cannot be read in books, and no one is capable of teaching them through words alone. They can only be etched into us through experience. Trusting the wrong person once teaches us to look at actions instead of promises. Losing an opportunity once teaches us the true value of time. Being rejected by life once makes us realize that talent isn't enough. Sometimes it takes the courage to keep walking in solitude. People suffer not because of failure, but because they believe they were supposed to succeed. It is expectation that makes the pain so sharp. But if we look deeper, the things we didn't achieve are often a form of salvation that time has yet to explain. Some doors close only to lead us toward a path that fits us better. And some dreams shatter not to end a life, but to give birth to a more mature version of ourselves. After all the disappointments, we are left with something incredibly precious: understanding. Understanding life, understanding others, and most importantly, understanding ourselves. That is something no one can take away. A treasure that makes us stronger after every time we thought we lost everything. Each morning is a new beginning. Wake up with a thankful heart, Kristen Butler. There are mornings when people wake up like a machine just being switched on. Hurried, groggy, carrying the mental scratches from yesterday that haven't yet healed. But there are also mornings where, just by opening our eyes and letting our hearts touch gratitude, the whole world seems to change its hue. In truth, what makes people exhausted isn't that life is too heavy, but that their minds are constantly dragging along old shadows. We often wake up with worry, with pressure, and with endless internal dialogues. And thus, we unconsciously turn a new day into a mere extension of yesterday. But gratitude has a strange power. It severs those chains. When a person knows how to be thankful for the ability to breathe, for the sight of the sun, for the chance to make amends, and for having someone to love, they are self-healing their exhausted nervous system. Gratitude doesn't make life perfect, but it makes the soul strong enough to walk through imperfections. Morning is like a blank sheet of paper, fragrant with hope. The pessimist will rush to smear it with the black ink of fear. The optimist will place upon it the light of faith. And those who are grateful, they will turn that paper into a garden. In that garden, every small ray of sunlight becomes a gift. Every passing breeze carries the meaning of life. That is why truly happy people are often not those who possess the most, but those who feel the most deeply. If we do not actively nurture gratitude, we easily become prisoners of negativity. A thank you in the morning is like opening a window in a long closed room, allowing light to flood in and sweep away the musty smell of despair. And sometimes, what saves a person from the abyss isn't a grand miracle, but simply the ability to realize, I still have a chance to start over. Every dawn bears the likeness of forgiveness. Life doesn't ask how many times you failed yesterday. The sun still rises, the birds still sing, the wind still moves gently across hearts filled with cracks. only humans are often too harsh on themselves. Waking up with a grateful heart is not an act of weakness, but a sign of a mature spirit, knowing how to bow before life only to stand up even stronger. And perhaps the most beautiful thing about each morning isn't the sunlight outside the frame, but the realization that we have one more day to love, to change, and to be kinder to ourselves and this world. Sometimes you find yourself in the middle of nowhere, and sometimes, in the middle of nowhere, you find yourself. There are stages in life where one suddenly feels lost in a land devoid of sympathetic voices. Once familiar relationships fade, and dreams that once burned bright turn to cold ash. That is the feeling of being in a deserted place. Not necessarily loneliness in presence, but a deep emptiness within the soul. A kind of silence where, even in a crowd, one can clearly hear their own heart cracking. Yet the beautiful paradox of life is that in those very wildernesses, humans have the chance to meet their truest selves. Because when life is noisy, we often live through roles. We try to be who society expects. We act strong to be recognized. We pretend to be happy to hide the fatigue rotting within. Only when we are cast into the silence, when the applause stops and no one is there to lead the way, do we begin to face the deepest parts of ourselves. That deserted place is like a psychological desert, harsh and arid, yet capable of stripping away every disguise. And then we realize the most terrifying thing isn't losing our direction in life, but never truly understanding who we are. There are forms of solitude that come not to destroy, but to purify. Just as an ancient tree must stand alone in the storm to drive its roots deep into the earth, humans need those precarious days to grow spiritually. When everything external collapses, the inner self is forced to speak. We begin to hear clearly what hurts us, what makes us happy, who is truly important, and who are merely shadows passing through our lives. In that moment, the wilderness is no longer a punishment, but a private room where the soul heals itself. People often fear the void because the void prevents us from running away from ourselves. We fill our days with work, social media, and shallow conversations just so we don't have to face the internal fractures. But the more we flee, the more we become strangers to ourselves. Only in silence can we hear the true voice of the soul. Only in solitude can we distinguish between what we truly want and what we are forced to want. The days when no one understands us are the moments that seem the most isolated. Yet it is from there that we learn to stand firm without leaning on anyone, learn to love our wounded parts, and finally realize that sometimes we must cross the desert to know where our hearts truly belong. Even the greatest were once beginners. Don't be afraid to take that first step, Muhammad Ali. People often look at the success of others as if they were born to shine. We see a majestic mountain, but forget it began as tiny grains of dust. We look at a talented person with admiration, but we fail to see the days they were once clumsy, lost, and filled with doubt about themselves. We are ready to admire others' journeys, yet we are far too critical of our own first steps. We want to be good immediately, to succeed quickly, to be perfect from the very first try. And then, with just a bit of clumsiness or a minor failure, we immediately doubt our own capacity. But in truth, every skill in the world is built upon a foundation of naivety. No one is born knowing how to be strong. No one enters life fully understanding how to weather every storm. What creates the difference isn't innate talent, but the courage to keep walking when one is still very imperfect. The first steps are always the hardest, because that is when we must battle the negative voices in our heads. We fear being laughed at, fear failure, fear that we are not good enough. But that fear is actually just a natural reaction of the mind to the unknown. The human brain always wants to stay in the comfort zone, because there it is less vulnerable. All growth lies outside of that comfort zone. Just as a young bird must cast itself from the nest to learn how to fly, humans must dare to leave familiarity to discover their true potential. The greatest regret is not failure, but never having dared to try. For failure gives us experience, while fear only leaves us with regret. There are people who spend their whole lives standing before the door of opportunity but lack the courage to knock. They wait to be better, more confident, more perfect, before they begin. But life does not grant confidence before the act. It is the act itself that creates confidence. Each small step is like a brick, silently building our character. And then one day, looking back, we realize that our current strong version was formed from thousands of moments where we trembled but did not give up. Truly great people are not those who have never known fear. They simply don't let fear decide their lives. They understand that every grand journey begins with a very human clumsiness. An artist once had first strokes that were crooked and messy. A speaker once trembled before a crowd. An entrepreneur once lost sleep over early failures. And a person of character was once someone who didn't know if they had what it took. Don't be ashamed if you are still slow. Don't despair if you aren't yet skilled. A seed cannot bloom into a giant tree overnight. What matters is not how perfectly you begin, but whether you have enough courage to begin at all. Because sometimes, the tiny step you take today is the starting point for an extraordinary version of yourself in the future. Distance is nothing. It is only the first step that is difficult. Marquise du Deffand. People often fear long journeys more than they fear standing still. Just seeing a road that is too far, or a goal that is too big, the mind begins to create thousands of reasons to falter. We worry we won't have enough strength, enough time, or enough talent. And so, before the journey even truly begins, we have already defeated ourselves in our own thoughts. Distance is but a concept of the future, while the first step is the battle of the present. Humans have a tendency to exaggerate things that haven't happened yet. When facing a major goal, the mind immediately imagines fatigue, failure, pressure, and countless obstacles. That is what makes many feel exhausted even before they have started. But life has never asked us to see the entire path. What life requires is just one small step of courage. For every great journey is made up of steps that seem quite ordinary. Before beginning, everything seems overwhelming, but once walking, the body and spirit learn to adapt. Like standing by a cold seashore, we always fear the first wave touching our skin. But once we dare to step in, the body grows used to the cold, and the initial fear dissolves like sea foam. Life is the same. The most terrifying thing isn't failing on the road, but never having enough courage to depart. Many spend their lives waiting for the perfect moment. They want to be more confident before they start, want to be good enough before they act, want everything to be certain before they walk. But no path reveals all its light at the very beginning. Life only illuminates a few steps ahead, and the rest appears as we continue to move forward. Human growth happens the same way. No one is strong before they start. People become strong because they started. Distance is sometimes just an illusion created by fear. A mountain viewed from afar always overwhelms us, but when actually climbing, we only need to focus on each small footstep. Great success is the same. A book is written line by line. A human life is changed by small but persistent decisions made every day. Greatness does not lie in how fast you go, but in not turning back after the first step. The most beautiful thing about those who dare to walk is that they understand they don't need to be perfect to start. They accept their initial clumsiness as a natural part of growth. They know they might tremble, might fail, might be slower than others, but at least they are moving toward the life they desire. And sometimes that first step taken in fear is the most important moment of an entire destiny. Because ultimately, distance has never been what stops people. What holds them back is simply the fear of leaving what is familiar. But once they are brave enough to take that first step, they realize the things that seemed unreachable were actually just waiting for them to begin their journey. Those who can, do. Those who can't, complain. Linus Torvalds. When unable to change reality, they seek to soothe their egos with complaints. In this life, two types of people always exist. Those who use their energy to act, and those who use it to explain why they cannot act. Complaining often stems not from difficult circumstances, but from a feeling of inner helplessness. A person who dares not walk often tries to turn their fear into logic. They blame the timing, blame life for being unfair, blame others for being luckier than them. Complaints are like a fog, obscuring the lack of courage they themselves don't want to admit. Sadly, the more people complain, the more they hypnotize themselves into believing they are victims of fate. And once accustomed to the role of the victim, they gradually lose the ability to change their lives. Those who are truly capable do not spend much time grumbling, not because their lives are easier, but because they understand that action is always more valuable than fleeting emotions. When they face difficulty, they find a way to learn. When they fail, they adjust. When they are rejected, they keep moving forward. Their minds are not focused on proving how much they suffer, but on how to become better. That is the biggest difference between a mature person and one who is forever stuck in stagnation. One faces the problem, while the other only tells stories about the problem. There is a tendency to seek sympathy through complaining, as it provides a sense of comfort. But comfort that lasts too long becomes the soft chair of procrastination. People become addicted to talking about difficulties rather than solving them. They feel they are fighting just because they have spoken of their hardship, while in reality, life stands still. Complaining is like drinking seawater to quench thirst. The more you drink, the more your inner strength dries up. Interestingly, the strongest people are often the quietest. They quietly learn new skills while others are complaining about injustice. They work in silence while others are still looking for reasons to quit. And then one day, the distance between them and those who only know how to complain becomes vast. Not because they were more talented from the start, but because they understood a simple principle. Life only changes when a person takes action. Of course, everyone has moments of fatigue and needs to be heard. But the difference lies here. The courageous use pain as fuel to move forward, while the weak use pain as an excuse to stop. A mature person does not deny difficulties, but they also don't turn those difficulties into their identity. They understand that every minute spent complaining is a minute lost to changing reality. The world doesn't remember how many times you complained. The world only sees the things you were brave enough to do. Never mistake activity for achievement, John Wooden. They move constantly, yet their inner selves remain stationary. They do so much, yet at the end of the day, they don't feel they have created anything meaningful. Activity often gives people an illusion of value. When busy, we feel important. Packed schedules, constant calls, and days spinning in work lead us to believe we are living effectively. But in truth, busyness does not equal growth, just as motion does not equal progress. A car running in circles consumes a lot of fuel, but ultimately goes nowhere. Humans are the same. Some spend their whole lives chasing work, chasing recognition, chasing petty goals, yet they never truly touch who they were meant to become. People fear silence because silence forces them to face the most terrifying question: what am I truly living for? So they fill their time with constant activity to avoid the internal feeling of emptiness. They reply to messages instantly, work without rest, and join every conversation, yet their soul is like a room without windows, full of sound but lacking light. True achievement is not measured by the number of times you were busy, but by the value you create and the person you become after those efforts. A person can work 16 hours a day and still not be any closer to their dream, while another, though walking slower, knows how to focus on the core and silently changes their life bit by bit. It doesn't matter how fast you run if you aren't headed in the right direction. There is a massive difference between doing much and doing what matters. Don't try to appear everywhere. Don't try to prove you are always busy. Know how to select what is worthy of your time and mind. Just as an arrow that wants to fly far must be pulled back in silence, humans sometimes need to stop and think, to see the target clearly, instead of just charging ahead by momentum. It is sad that society often praises busyness more than awareness. One is easily complimented for working late, for a thick schedule, and for always being in a state of having no time. But few ask whether all that activity actually brings happiness. Some trade their youth to climb a ladder, only to realize at the end that the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. Life doesn't need people to appear in too many places. What life needs is for you to truly be present in what you do, to understand where you are going, and to know why you started. Because ultimately, the value of a life lies not in how busy they were, but in the meaningful things they truly left behind after all their motions. Creativity is allowing yourself to make mistakes. Art is knowing which ones to keep. Scott Adams. Creativity does not begin with perfection. It begins with the courage to be wrong. All great things have passed through chaos, clumsiness, and moments of deviating from the mold. From childhood, we are taught we must be right. In school, we fear giving the wrong answer. At work, we fear making the wrong decision. In love, we fear placing our trust in the wrong person. Gradually, the fear of being wrong turns the mind as rigid as a room with locked windows. And when we no longer dare to be wrong, we lose our ability to create. Because creativity is never born from safety. It is born from foolish experiments, from ideas that seem absurd, and from times we stepped off the familiar path. Just as a river must wind through rocks to create the beauty of the landscape, the human mind needs the friction of failure to unlock new things within itself. Interestingly, many of humanity's masterpieces were born from mistakes. An accidental slip of the brush creates the emotion for a painting. A note played offbeat becomes the soul of a harmony. A crack in pottery and Japanese art is gilded with gold to turn it into a unique beauty. Life is the same. Some things that seem like damage become the very things that make a person different. The traumas we've endured sometimes create a profound depth in our gaze. The failures we want to forget become the inspiration that helps us understand others better. The ability to see value in the imperfect. Those who are spiritually mature do not try to control everything absolutely. They understand that true beauty lies not in cold smoothness, but in very human marks. A speech that is too perfect can be cold, but a moment of sincere hesitation makes the listener's heart vibrate. A person who has never stumbled might be admirable, but one who has shattered and stood up again makes others feel much more understood and inspired. True art is not the ability to create perfection, but the ability to recognize what is worth keeping amidst the chaos. That is why the artist doesn't simply create. They also know how to listen to the emotions hidden in the flaws. They see the light in the crack, the soul in the incomplete, and those who live deeply do the same. They don't try to erase every mistake in their lives, but learn to turn them into the material for growth. What makes people suffer most isn't making mistakes, but thinking that mistakes diminish their value. But in truth, it is the stumbles that create the personality and depth of a soul. A perfect blank sheet of paper is soulless. Only when it is written on, crossed out, and crumpled by time does it bear its own story. It's not about becoming a person without a blemish, but learning how to turn the things that once made us ashamed into a unique and beautiful part of our own selves. There are only two mistakes one can make on the road to truth: not going all the way and not starting. Buddha. Most people do not fail because of a lack of ability, but because they stopped too soon or never had enough courage to begin. There are those who stand before the door of change for many years but do not dare to open it. They fear failure, fear being hurt, fear facing the true version of themselves. So they choose to stay in the familiar zone even though it makes their soul gradually wither. Not starting is a way of imprisoning oneself in an invisible cage of fear. It makes people live in an imagination of the life they could have had rather than actually stepping into that life. And the most painful thing is, time never turns back to wait for someone who is forever hesitant. But perhaps even sadder than not starting is giving up halfway. For those who go halfway through the journey are often those who have seen the light, yet lacked the patience to reach it. They stop when difficulty appears, when loneliness sets in, when the results haven't yet bloomed. Humans always want to see quick results, to feel that their efforts have meaning. But the truth, like everything profound in life, never opens up to hurried souls. It requires an almost harsh persistence, the ability to keep walking even when the destination is not yet in sight. The journey to find truth is essentially the journey to find oneself. And on that journey, humans must face many layers of illusion. We realize that some beliefs we once clung to are just shirts society put on us. Some things we thought were happiness turn out to be just an escape from loneliness. Some successes that seemed brilliant cannot fill the void in the soul. Searching for truth has never been a comfortable journey. It is like entering a dark forest, where every step forces a person to give up a fake part of themselves. People often fear the truth more than they fear lies, because truth has the power to shatter the illusions that make us feel safe. Therefore, many choose to stop halfway, not because they cannot continue, but because they start to see things that make them uncomfortable. But only those brave enough to go all the way understand that behind that confusion is spiritual freedom. Once people truly understand themselves, they no longer live just to please the world. The most beautiful thing about those who dare to start and dare to go to the end isn't that they always win, but that they live a life without betraying themselves. They accept exhaustion, accept being lost, accept even the days when no one understands them, just to continue walking toward what they believe is right. And that journey makes their souls deeper, freer, and more authentic. The greatest tragedy of life is not failing in the search for meaning, but never having enough courage to enter that journey or leaving it just before the light can appear. Don't worry about failures. Worry about the chances you miss when you don't even try. Jack Canfield. Humans often fear failure as they fear a wound that will diminish their value. We fear rejection, fear being laughed at, fear the feeling that we are not good enough to reach our desires. And so, because of the obsession with the possibility of falling, many choose to stand still. They live in the comfort zone of familiar things, where there is less pain, but also no magic. Failure is not terrifying. It hurts. But that pain usually only exists for a period of time. Much more haunting is the feeling of, if only. If only I had been a little more brave that day. If only I had said what needed to be said. If only I had started sooner instead of forever waiting for a perfect moment. Those if-onlys are like a silent echo in the mind, following us through many years. And unlike failure, which can be healed by time, regret often never completely disappears. It remains like a void that as we grow older, we realize we cannot go back to fill. We exaggerate the consequences of failure, but underestimate the consequences of inaction. We imagine that standing still will keep us safe, but in reality, procrastination silently erodes self-belief. Every time we miss an opportunity just because of fear, we unconsciously send a message to our minds, I am not brave enough. And gradually, fear is no longer just a fleeting emotion. It becomes a part of our character. There are doors in life that only open once. Not every opportunity returns at the moment we are ready. Youth, love, passion, big dreams all have their seasons. A seed, if not sown at the right time, will never bloom into a tree. Humans are the same. Some possibilities within us will die if they are never tested. And the most heartbreaking thing is that many only realize this when time has gone too far. Truly strong people are not those who are not afraid of failure. They just differ in one thing. They understand that failure is better than living in regret. They accept the feeling of trembling when starting, accept the clumsiness of first times, accept even the possibility of being hurt because at least they are truly living. A person who has failed can still stand up and start again. But a person who has never dared to try usually only has what-if stories to tell themselves. Life never promised that every effort would succeed. But life always gives an invisible reward when we dare to step out of fear. That is growth. Every time we dare to try, no matter the result, we become stronger than our previous version. We understand ourselves more, understand life more, and most importantly, we know we didn't betray what our hearts truly desired. The thing that causes the most remorse is not the times we stumbled on the journey, but the beautiful paths we never had enough courage to set foot on.